Math 2, Unit 9. It starts off with the basics, adding polynomials, subtracting polynomials, and then it starts getting into multiplying polynomials. So the rules for adding and subtracting are slightly different than multiplying and dividing, which we'll talk about. Let's do several of these so that you guys get comfortable with it. First and foremost, adding. When I'm adding polynomials, I only can combine x squareds with other x squareds. I can only put x's together with other x's. I can only put together constants with other constants. Same thing when you're subtracting. So I'll do a subtracting problem with you. If I was doing 5x squared plus 3x minus 7 and I'm subtracting this, you are subtracting 2x squared from the 5x squared, and you would be subtracting this negative 8, which actually turns it into a positive 8, which can only combine with that constant. So what you're putting together is this with the other x squared. 5x squared minus 2x squared is 3x squared. The 3x has nothing else to combine with. The 8 and the 7 can combine, and 8 take away 7 is 1. And I would write this from highest degree to the next highest degree to the constant at the end. That's called standard form. We always write our answers in standard form. That's how they will be on your quiz or test, on any multiple choice test as well. So that's what we do when we're subtracting polynomials. But what do we do when we're multiplying them? When you're multiplying, sometimes you have to FOIL. If I have one binomial times another binomial, we usually use called FOIL because the first times the first is the first thing we do. First times the first, 3 times 2 is 6x squared. Then we do the outside times the outside. 3x times negative 7 is negative 21x. Inside times the inside. 5 times 2x is plus 10x. Different signs. And then 5 times the negative 7 is the last, minus 35. And sometimes these middle terms combine. If they can, put them together. 6x squared minus 11x minus 35. So my final answer, 6x squared minus 11x minus 35. In the beginning of Unit 9, you started adding, subtracting, multiplying polynomials. The second half went into factoring. So I want to do maybe one more multiplying problem just so that you guys are getting better at it. And then we'll go from there. So let me look at H and possibly K. So if I have a square, we deal with the exponent first before we multiply. I would deal with the 5y minus 1 times the 5y minus 1 first, then deal with the 2. So I'm going to treat this like it's in parentheses. 25y squared minus 5y plus 1. The 2 still out front. 25y squared minus 10y plus 1. And then I would take that 2 and multiply it to each one of these things, making it 50y squared minus 20y plus 2 for my final answer. Exponents first, FOIL, then take the 2 and multiply it to the entire trinomial. The only way this gets harder is if you have a binomial times a binomial times a binomial, which is what K looks like down here. K, you have this times this. So what do you do with that? How do you FOIL 3 different binomials? Well, you cover up one of them and you FOIL the first 2 and treat that like it's in brackets. Do the 3x squared plus 18x plus x plus 6. Put that in a bracket. 3x squared plus 19x plus 6. and then take that x minus 2 and FOIL that out. How does that work? You do this times all three. 3x to the third plus 19x to the third plus 6x. And then you take the negative 2 times all three. And I usually, when I do that, I line up negative 2 times 3x squared is negative 6x squared. This should be a squared. Negative 6x squared times that is negative 38x times that is negative 12. I line them up so that I can combine them when I'm done multiplying them. Plus 13x squared minus 32x minus 12. 3x to the third plus 13x squared minus 32x minus 12 is what I got for that one. Let me scoot that over a little bit. There's my final answer on that. So the first half is adding, subtracting, multiplying. There really is no dividing. When you get to doing the opposite of multiplying, that is called factoring. And so there are several different types of factoring, and they review them on number 2, and they have A through M. Like, hey, let's practice all these different types of factoring. Factoring is used from Unit 9 all the way through Unit 12, I think it is. So there's the first type of factoring called Gcf factoring. What's the greatest common factor? What can go into 12 into 18? 6. And what can go into x squared, y to the third, and x to y? I can factor out a 6xy from both terms. It's like the opposite of distributing. What can go into both? Pull that out and then figure out this times what gives you that. 6 times 2 gives you 12. I already have one x. I need another x to get x squared. I need another y to get, I need another 2 y's, y squared to get y to the third. 6 times what gives you a negative 18. 6 times 3. And I already have the xy. This times that would give you that. That is called Gcf factoring. That would be my final answer for number 2A. Then there's the kind of factoring that we call guess and check. Guess and check factoring is where you're trying to find two things that multiply the first term. Like what times what gives you this? N times n. What times what gives you 36? There's lots of possibilities. 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and 6 times 6. So what you're trying to do is figure out which ones multiply that will have a combined total of 9 when you add or subtract them. When I look at this, 6 and 6, nope, 13, nope, 12 and 3. If I did 12 minus 3, that gives me 9. So as I'm checking, I'm looking for a combination whose outside and inside would have a sum or difference of 9. If I did a positive 12 and a negative 3, 12 minus 3 is a positive 9. And a negative 3 times a positive 12 is a negative 36. What I do at this point is I check, does this times this equal that? And I just FOIL it out in my head. If it works, I know I'm right. And I put down my answer as n minus 3 times n plus 12. The only way that gets harder is if they throw in some extra letters, like F. In F, what they did is they threw in this extra b squared. So you might have an a times a to get you a squared, but when you have the b squared and there's a 32, don't freak out. You still figure out the 32 like 1 and 32, 2 and 16, or 4 and 8. I think 4 and 8 add to be 12. Well, put the letter B next to both of those. 4B and 8B. And put some positives and see what that outside is. 8AB and 4AB make 12AB. This is what F factors to. It factors to A plus 4B times A plus 8B. Sometimes there'll be a difference of squares factoring. When there is a difference, and that's a perfect square and that's a perfect square, and you're wondering where's the bx, the bx is 0. X times x will give you x squared. 6 times 6 gives you 36. If you add one set and subtract one set, a positive 6x and a negative 6x would cancel out in the middle. Positive 6 times a negative 6 is a negative 36. This is the easiest way to factor when it's a difference of squares. There has to be one negative sign and they both have to be perfect squares. So that's what you would actually even do on letter J. And then sometimes what they're going to do is they're going to put them all together and they're going to expect you to pull out a GCF and keep factoring. The key words is factor completely. So if I'm looking at the letter L, I would pull out a 5A as a GCF. See what's remaining. This times this is that, this times this is that, this times this is that. But sometimes this stuff that's in the parentheses factors further. I'm seeing an A plus 3 and an A plus 3 because 3 times 3 is 9, and 3A makes 6A. So what I would write my final answer as, because I have two of these factors of A plus 3, is I would write my answer a little bit smaller by putting a little squared outside the A plus 3 since there's two of them. It's easier to write. If you ever see that, it means this. Most of us would accept this as the answer, but for a multiple choice test, your teachers are going to have a squared for the multiple choice answer if there's two of them. This is how we will write it. And then your last page. Your last page is going to ask you about what is one of the factors. It's basically saying, can you factor this? And we don't want to give you both factors. We're going to give you one of them. So I'm going to recommend, as you're doing these last four problems, factor them and see what you get when you get your answer, and then pick the appropriate choice from there. The only one that I thought was kind of funny back here was number 3, where they say, what's going to be in front of your x squared and what's going to be your constant? So you could, in theory, FOIL, 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 and then multiply by 2. Or if you know that the 4x times the 3x, I'm just going to circle those. 4x times 3x is 12x squared. And then you'd have to multiply that by this 2. You should know what's going to be in front of your x squared because the far left side is going to be the coefficient of that x squared. What's it going to be? 8 times 3 is 24x squared. Sometimes we can just do the front and multiply it by 2. Sometimes we could just do the last. Let me look at the last. Plus 3 times plus 5 is 15 times the 2. 15 times 2 is 30. And those are two of the choices to fill in that box. They don't expect you necessarily to work out the whole problem sometimes. You just find the coefficients. Unless you feel like working the whole thing out, then go ahead. Oh, one last thing I do forget. I need to make a mention of it. There was one typo. It's on number 6. Number 6 says factor the trinomial. I'm going to put it here that there is a typo. For the record, this needs to be a positive 15. Otherwise, it doesn't work or none of the answers will match. So treat this as 3x squared minus 14x plus 15. And let's factor that. What factors? Let's see, 3x times an x and then 15. You have 15 times 1. You have 5 times 3. Those are your only choices, or you might mix it around. I would do 3 times 3 is 9. And 5x. 9x and 5x makes 14x if this was a negative and a negative. And the choice says, which of the following is one of the factors? See how close they are? Nope. Nope. That's how a multiple choice test is going to be. And your final is all multiple choice. I don't know if I mentioned that already. Since it is all multiple choice, you have to pay particular attention to a plus sign or a minus sign, because that's the difference between getting it all right or all wrong. There's no partial credit. So take your time as you're doing that. I'm going to stop your notes right there.